Welcome back. So, wicked problem types. I've talked a lot in previous videos about some of the really big global issues, but what about the wicked problems that organisations face periodically? In fact, at the moment, probably far too frequently. So in this video, I'm going to have a look at a model developed by a couple of American academics, Christine Pearson and Ian Mitroff. I'll then give you a metaphor which kind of explains what that model is about. We'll look in a little bit more detail and explain the model in a little more depth. I'll outline the research that I've used to actually develop this particular model, or how this model was developed and how my thinking's developed in this space. And then I'll give you an interesting example of the idea of wicked problem types and how they affect organisations. So, the model that I use when I talk about wicked problems in organisations is really a derivative of the work of two American academics, Ian Mitroff and Christine Pearson. What they basically outlined in their model was what they call 7 crisis families. And these include families covering things off like external economic attacks, external information attacks, what they call mega damage in terms of environmental issues. They also talk about breaks, which is where operations break down, as well as issues relating to public perception of the company. Right at the centre of their model is occupational health and safety. Another family within their model is the psycho family of crises or wicked problems, which includes things like terrorism and cybersecurity, as well as sexual harassment within the workplace. Now, on top of these, what I've overlaid is 5 other families. And the 5 other families that I've overlaid come from the global families that we see. And the reason I've overlaid them is simply because businesses, particularly corporate large businesses, multinationals, are severely impacted by these global crises. Now, what are those? What have I included? I've included, of course, the climate crisis. I've included inequality, which can cause issues where you have lots of different plants in lots of different parts of the world. And we've seen issues around modern slavery, for example, can be a real issue for some corporations. Extremism causes an issue. Now, that's quite strongly related to the psycho family, but nevertheless, I've pulled it out as separate because it's an international issue rather than something that is specific to corporates. Occupational health, I've actually broadened out to public health because the obvious example of COVID that has just gone through, but there will be other things that are coming along, and we need to be aware that there is a crisis family that we need to deal with reference to that. And then, of course, there's war, and we know that there's a current example of that going on, which causes major issues for corporations across the world, which ties together a couple of the other families as well. Now, the slightly light-hearted metaphor that I use to describe, if you like, the crisis families, is the Addams family. If you think about the Addams family from popular culture, they're a fairly unique collection of individuals, all of whom have got a very different outlook on life and all of whom have a different way of causing chaos. So, wicked problems are first of all distinguished by their origin. By that I mean human social versus technological, economic or ecosystemic. We then contrast that source with the nature of their initiating event. Are they chronic or normal issues, or are they acute or severe issues that have been going on for a while? So if we actually take a good look at my augmentation of Pearson and Mitroff's model, you'll see that there are some interesting things. Problems located in the upper quadrants occur because of breaks in the ecosystem, technical procedures, or economic failures. Problems in the lower quadrants trace to breakdowns in human behaviour or social systems. Problems located in the right quadrants originate through relatively normal everyday events, such as equipment breakdown through normal use or operator error. For these types, a relatively normal occurrence escalates to a major problem. Types which fall in the left quadrants have aberrant or deviant causes as their source. Pathological explanations of human behaviour exemplify this, as in the case of a psychopathic saboteur. Mega damage is caused by intentional environmental abuse or neglect, or as the effect of a more normal break. The category perceptual refers to those wiki problems for which the initial cause is a threat to reputation. Of course, every problem type could potentially result in negative perception by key stakeholders. As I've indicated before, and what I've added is the problems in red circles, and these impact society in general. Problems in blue rectangles impact organisations much more narrowly. Who's influenced my thinking in this space? Well, clearly, Christine Pearson and Ian Mitroff. I've had a long-standing interest in their work for many, many years, since I used to teach risk and crisis management in business schools and do research in that space as well. I'm also interested in the work of Earle and Waddington around brand values. I think perceptual damage is a particularly pressing issue that we need to be aware of. So that's worth looking at if you've not come across that book before. Earle and Waddington, Brand Vandals, is a good read. So an example of this is probably the most public example that we see of businesses that have faced these types of problem are oil companies. We've seen BP have major issues in terms of a break, which caused substantial damage in the Gulf of Mexico. And we've seen earlier examples as well. But we also see real issues for oil companies like Shell trying to manage the damage to perception that's caused by their very activities. So it's extremely difficult for oil companies to actually manage some of these things. Shell, for example, is a master of scenario planning, and one of the things that they're having to do is to look at how they can actually move their core business away from petrochemicals to other things because of all of the major issues and potentially wicked problems that their sort of business is associated with. Now, what it's going to do, it looks like, is it's going to retain its investments and exploit its investments in petrochemicals for some time to come. But it's actually beginning to shift its operation to the provision of electrical energy. But its wickedest problem is that it's been in the oil and gas industry for 112 years. And how on earth is it going to actually slowly reduce its emissions from its core business? So the pressure on Shell to divest from its core business has been going on for some time now. And there have been protests at its headquarters regularly for a number of years. They've been sued by 17,000 Dutch citizens in a class action suit. The truth is that eventually it looks like Shell will have to defer to its investors and to protesters and to find a way forward to operate strategically to deal with all of the wicked problems that it faces from various of the crisis families that I've outlined. If you'd like to find out more about what I do, please click any of the links below. Particularly interested to see if you want to get an assessment of your work-life environment and just how wicked that actually is by taking the wicked scorecard.